movements of their own. Their main aim was to quit Georgia. The ordinary people of Abkhazia and South Ossetia saw no prospects for themselves were they to stay in Georgia.
I was a postgraduate student at the Institute of History, Archaeology and Ethnography in Tbilisi for 4 years. For example, some professors could say to me this: "You're a good boy, you might have quite a future. You're exceptionally clever, but you're Ossetian, see? There'll be no future for you, ever."
The first hotspot flared up in South Ossetia. It was a reaction to the Georgian authorities abolishing the South Ossetian autonomous region and including it in Georgia on the same basis as everyone else. This started an armed conflict.
Georgia, let's put it this way, didn't have a civil society as we understand it today. Nor could there have been anything of the kind in Soviet Georgia, in Soviet society. And of course, our struggle was perceived by everyone as separatism.
The military that came to Skunval from central Georgia were opposed by Ossetian self-defense squads. After protracted fighting, the territory froze in the status of a non-recognized republic for 16 years. In 1992, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, in Abkhazia the locals were preparing for a Georgian invasion. The situation was aggravated because by the start of 1980, the Georgians in Abkhazia outnumbered the actual Abkhazians 5-1. It was increasingly more difficult for the natives to get key jobs, particularly in the prestigious tourism and hotel trade.
I'll tell you frankly, they never loved us, and they probably never will, and for good reasons. Perhaps it's the wrong policy, but who am I to judge? There are politicians, and it's their job to deal with this.
During the war between Abkhazia and Georgia, Soso Akharaya was the head of Georgia's military police. In Abkhazia, he has been outlawed for the last 15 years. Today, Soso, like many of his fellow veterans who fought for Georgia, thinks that the deployment of troops only aggravated the conflict between Abkhazian and Georgian people and led to irreversible consequences. As for the military itself, it was left to sink or swim.
There was no global military operation. I mean, our military command hadn't planned or decided anything.
Officially, Georgian troops entered Abkhazia on August 14, 1992, under the pretext of guarding a length of railroad going through Abkhazia from increasing robberies. The true goal wasn't to allow Abkhazia to claim independence.
Yeltsin was the president back then. He called me while I was in Tbilisi. He asked me to think once again whether it made sense for Georgian troops to enter Sukhum. Yeltsin was insistent that they shouldn't do it. They shouldn't do it.
Nevertheless, Georgian troops fought their way into Sukhum. The first victims of the so-called campaign for territorial integrity of Georgia were people staying in Sukhum health resorts. Several hours into the military operation in Abkhazia, a Georgian attack helicopter fired several rockets at a beach in Sukhum.
When it all started, war was a shock to me. I saw even the Second World War, which started very suddenly, and there it all started just as unexpectedly. In broad daylight, next to people swimming in the sea, bombs were falling on the beach. I worked at school back then, and first bodies were laying next to the school building.
Along with the people, everything connected with Abkhazians was being destroyed in the town. Houses, museums, and even memorials.
This place is unique because in 1937 this famous Abkhazian diplomat was executed by shooting on Stalin's order. The second time came in 1992, when the war began. The soldiers came here and they shot him for a second time.
One of the first actions of the Georgian military was the assault of the Council of Ministers. After the Abkhazian flag was removed from the building, Georgian generals hurried to report to Tbilisi that the rebellious province had been put under control. However, seasoned fighters realized well that it was only the beginning of the war.
It was clear that the Abkhazians were going to fight. Of course, they were the opponents. They've always fought well. We just needed to be realistic. The Abkhazians were never going to give us what's theirs.
Sukhum resident Tofik Karzalia still keeps a gun at hand in his apartment in case another war begins. With this gun, he fought on the side of the Abkhazians 15 years ago. During the war, his wife stayed in the Georgia-occupied Sukhum. In those days, many Abkhazians were executed in the city without trial.
Armed people came to my house for 5 times. Last time there were 18 of them. I refused to come out, so they told me they'd take me to the yard and shoot me. I said, no, here are my neighbors standing near us, so show them your Georgian face. Show them what kind of heroes you are. If you want to be heroes, there is Abkhazians opposition over there, at the front line. Go fight them.
Before the war with Georgia, Tofik last handled a rifle during his army service when he was 20.
It's very easy to do. It's very simple. That's it.
During the war, he had to remember his old skills. Sukhum was reclaimed by the volunteer Abkhazian army only 13 months after the beginning of the war. After 3 days of street fighting, the Abkhazian flag reappeared over the building of the Council of Ministers.
After losing Sukhum, we didn't have enough forces to defeat the enemy. That was the end of the campaign.
In the last days of the war, Georgian families were fleeing their homes in haste. After the mass bloodshed, many of them couldn't imagine themselves living next to Abkhazians. Thousands of refugees were evacuated with the help of the Russian Black Sea Fleet.
We evacuated some 40,000 people from Abkhazia to Georgian seaports. We loaded up to 1,500 people on infantry landing ships. It was a full-scale special operation in which people were evacuated under guard of combat ships. For the war went on in the sea as well. People had to be guarded.
Many houses in Sukhum still stand in ruins. Abkhazia found itself an unrecognized republic. Immediately after the war, Georgia declared an economic blockade of Abkhazia, which led to soaring unemployment rates across the republic. A new profession of barrowman emerged to designate those who would smuggle barrowfuls of tangerines and grapes from their orchards through the Russian border. Many just didn't have the money to buy any more substantial means of transport. For the majority of the population, the post-war years became an even greater shock than the war itself.
All the mental disorders and all the other illnesses that we have now, including cancers, stem not as much from the war as from the post-war period. It was a terrible time.